All right, what do you think, Kaima? Should we start or we start? Okay. So very warm welcome to you, all of you, especially to our guest speakers from Iceland and all of you who have joined to listen to them. And this webinar will focus on the experience of Iceland, where consent law was introduced in 2018. My name is Kadi Viik. I work as an editor and advocacy specialist at Feministeerium. And for those of you who don't know us, we are an independent feminist organization in Estonia. Our main activities or areas of activities are communication, advocacy, and community building, or empowerment of the feminist community is maybe the right way to put it. And regarding advocacy, then consent law and everything surrounding bodily autonomy has been like our main focus area over the last years. And we do this webinar in cooperation with the Icelandic Women's Rights Association, and it's supported by the Active Citizens Fund under the project My Body, My Choice. And as I mentioned, we have lobbied for a consent law for quite some time now, and we have like a small victory maybe to celebrate, or we have decided that we will celebrate every step on the way, because our new government that entered office in April this year has agreed to introduce a consent law, and the bill should be approved by the government in November this year. So this webinar is very timely, as we can hear about the Icelandic experience. And the outline is, we will listen to one short presentation and two longer ones. And first, my colleague and ethics lecturer, Elise Rohtmets, will give you a very short overview of where we are with the issue in Estonia right now. And then we'll have two guest speakers from Iceland. So Jón Steindór Valdimarsson and Drífa Snædal. And we should have plenty of time for questions and discussions afterwards. So I suggest that we keep all the comments, and even if you have like detailed questions, keep them until the end, because I think we can cover all of it. But first, we'll start with Elise. She's an advocacy expert, like myself, and she also lectures in ethics at the University of Applied Sciences in Tallinn. And she has done like a massive research work in how the consent law has been designed and also implemented in Europe, and which models different countries have chosen. But today she will focus on Estonia just to sort of frame this discussion, and she will give you a brief overview of where we are and what the public discussion has been like. So please, Elise.
Thank you. So everybody can see the slides?
Yep.
Great. So hi, everybody. Today, I will give a brief overview on the topic of reforming Estonia's penal code regarding offenses against sexual self-determination from, let's say, sort of coercion-based paradigm, as it's called, to a consent-based paradigm. This includes the overview of our current legislation and media discussion. So to start, here are, I will present a short but not comprehensive list of articles under the section of offenses against sexual self-determination. As you can see, the definitions of both rape and a non-penetrative sexual offense feature the limiting conditions that the act has to happen either using violence, which includes threats, or taking advantage of the helpless state of the victim. Either the victim is not able to comprehend what is happening and due to that does not resist, or is not physically able to resist. The aggravating circumstances include, but are not limited to, for example, when the act is done by a group, or it causes the death of the victim, or it leads the victim to suicide or suicide attempt, or if committed by a person who has previously committed a criminal offense provided in said subchapter, the law. I also added two other examples that do not include the above limiting conditions that are in force at the moment. In this case, the limiting condition is dependency. It has to be, the dependency has to be then objectively present, for example, demonstrable by paper trail, but not limited to. Other articles under the section that I did not include are sexual intercourse with a descendant, sexual intercourse or other act of sexual nature with a child, and buying sex from minors. A person is a priori not able to comprehend when they are under 10 years of age. Also, we might add that since 2017, sexual harassment is under the offenses against political and civil rights in the Penal Code and defined strictly as an intentional physical act of sexual nature against the will of another person with the degrading objectives or consequences. It's punishable by a fine or by detention. So for Estonian speakers, here are a few excerpts from articles to our guests from Iceland. This is a short overview of the media discussion on the consent law, specifically the media dubbed Yes Means Yes law, which was pioneered by two gynecologists, Kai Part and Made Laanpere, who are both practicing professionals and university lecturers, along with establishing modern centers for victims of sexual violence. The discussion took off in 2021, although the media has been curious of low conviction rates since 2018. In the beginning, the articles by the two gynecologists used the phrase that with the consent law, the accused should provide evidence that they got an enthusiastic yes. This phrase was then criticized by one ex and one current Supreme Court justice who deemed the law unconstitutional as it violates the presumption of innocence. This was followed by lawyers' rebuttal in the media that the consent law is about changes in substantive law, which would give the victim a better chance in court and has nothing to do with overthrowing the presumption of innocence. This was again disputed by the same acting Supreme Court justice that there are no reasonable cases not covered by our current law. One concern raised by the Supreme Justice and left unanswered was how would the consent-based framework not make all prostitution rape? Last autumn, then the pink headlines here, Kadi and I from Feministeerium wrote about the different definitions of rape in the EU countries and gave an overview of scientific findings regarding the changed legislation. Our articles were then followed by the European Commission's report, which oversees the implementation of the Istanbul Convention that Estonia needs to change its law urgently. This was all then late autumn last year. At the same time, the parliamentary elections were near. The promise to reform our penal code was in the election program of Social Democrats, the Green Party, and Estonia 200. After the elections in the spring, the newly formed coalition plans to go forward with the reform. As you can see, the coalition agreement says we will bring offenses against sexual self-determination in the penal code into conformity with the Istanbul Convention, taking into account the principle of consent so as to guarantee protection for victims of sexual violence. As Kadi already said, the government's working plan foresees that the bill should be ready for approval by the government this November. There have been a few events, to our knowledge, where the consent law has been discussed among professionals, but it seems that at the moment there is still confusion about the nature of the reform. Feministeerium plans to publish a series of articles analyzing the nature of consent and hoping to provide some insights on edge cases, as well as facilitate meetings with outside experts like this one. Thank you. This was my very, very short overview of where we're at in Estonia.
Thank you, Elise, for your presentation, and I will proceed directly to Jón Steindór Valdimarsson. I'm really happy that you could join us because Jón is the person who initiated the bill of the consent law in Iceland, and he has been especially active in gender politics and equality issues. He represents the Liberal Party, but I understand that in Iceland there was a massive consensus behind this change. So basically it was voted unanimously. And he's also a lawyer by training. So please, Jón, I will give you the floor. And if you want to show slides, you can start them when you want to.
Thank you very much. And it's a great pleasure to be with you today to discuss matters that are of very great importance. I would just like to start with saying that even though I am a lawyer by education, I am not an expert in criminal law or have not been practicing law for many, many years. So I am not a specialist, so to say, in that, but I am a politician, and through that we can influence the law and how they read and what influence they can have. And I like often to talk about the importance of sending out clear political messages into society. And that is part of the role of politicians. And we have the means, both by initiating laws, but also by funding, because the parliaments are in control of the money, and they can decide where money goes. So this is very important. I would just also like to mention that the most part of my life I have been working for employers' organizations, and it is just from 7-8 years ago that I started in politics. And I would like also to mention, because it is also important, that exactly today, I have been married for 25 years, and I have lived with the same woman that I'm now married to for 45 years. And I was so fortunate that when she was about 40 years old, and we are both 65 now, then she started to study gender issues in the university. And so we discussed a lot gender politics and gender studies at our home, and she managed somehow to educate me. So I I started to realize the importance of looking at many things in society through the glasses of gender politics. So this is just a small contribution or gratitude to her for having made me realize that things must be looked at from many perspectives, and one of them is what gender, the importance of gender in that respect. I think it's also fair to start before we dive into the consent law to say that equality or the equality between the genders is of utmost importance. And I know that you know not much more about this than I, but it is a fact that in many ways, even though, for example, here in Iceland, where we can pride ourselves being number one in the gender gap report from the World Economic Forum, there we have still many things that we must and should improve. And there are many things that where especially women are not equal to us men. And this has to change, and there are many things that we still have to do in this respect. But I think we have to have this in mind, because all of this is a part of changing society, you know. And when we come to the question about sexual and also domestic violence and sexual abuse, it is a fact that no one can deny that there usually are women that are the victims or are violence, but the doers are in almost all cases men. That is just a fact that we have to recognize, and we have to fight against. And we know that we are trying to change attitudes that are, well, should we say thousands of years behind them. The patriarch system, where women have for the most time been subdued by men. This is a fact. This is very difficult to change, but we have to try as much as we can, and we have many ways to do this. But if I go to the so we have to acknowledge that there is something fundamentally wrong in our societies, and we have to change it. And I know that you are working on it, and I know that Drífa is working on it, and many people are trying to change things. It takes time, but when you see something is wrong, you have to put effort into changing things, and sometimes you have to do it by law or regulation. Even though I am self politician that adhere to liberal views, and in liberalism you feel that the individual should be more or less free to do what he wants within the settings of a framework, where he does not overstep someone else's rights. But sometimes you have to put in place rules that, in a way, steer things in a certain direction. And I think one of those is the concept of consent and adjustments in the penal code of countries, where we acknowledge that we have a system where, because of many things in our surroundings, in the system that we have, that men, in a way, tend often to think that they have some sort of right or privilege when it comes to sexual relations with women, so that they are entitled to, when they want to have sexual relations with a woman, and it doesn't, and without respecting what she really wants it or not. Sexual interaction should, of course, always be only with the consent of both parties, or all parties for that matter. So this is a fundamental issue, and has very much to do with the right of the individual to control him or herself what she wants or doesn't want. So in Iceland, so I will go back to the changes of our penal code, and it was mentioned in the introduction that I was the initiator of the bill that came into force in 1918, and it went through Parliament, I think, in a very under special surroundings, if you like. I first presented the bill in March 2017, and then we were 4 MPs, all from my party, that presented the bill. Then there was a change in politics, there was a change of government, and there was a new election. So I had to present the bill again after the elections, and I did so in December also 2017. But at that time, there were 11 MPs on the bill. We are 63 in Parliament, by the way, in Iceland, 63. And so there were 11 MPs on the bill. And from 6 out of 8 political parties. So it already there had a broad support, and then it was passed in March 2018, and it was without anyone saying no, one abstention. But you also have to bear in mind that at the time I was in opposition. I was not, my party was not part of the government at the time when the law was passed. And it is highly unusual that a bill from the opposition, especially if it regards fundamental changes, is passed. So you could ask, how on earth could this happen? And I often wondered myself why. And there are several reasons for this, I think. And the most important was that some 6 months after I presented the bill, the Me Too movement took off. You know, so there was an atmosphere in society that was, if you like, in favor or recognized that something must be done. So in that sense, this initiative of mine and this uproar in the society, it came together at the right time, and so people were rather positive towards the bill. I think also that it was very well prepared. We did lots of research, and we were very well prepared when we put the bill forward. And I think also it was, even though I say it myself, I think it had also a role to play, like it or not. But it was a man, elderly man, not very elderly, with gray hair, that had been in business for a long time, that was driving the bill. I think that mattered. you know, I was not a typical feminist by looks, but I think I am a feminist. I like to believe it at least. So I think that played a role. So what I'm saying by this is it is very important to engage, you know, all sorts of people to rally around or behind what you are trying to do now in Estonia, because it is, and of course it was in Iceland that there were many that were very skeptical. Also, many of the politicians, even though they agreed to the bill, so it became law, there were lots of skepticism. You know, all kinds of, you know, how are you going to go about having sex? Do you need to have a written contract beforehand, you know, where you sign off that you consent and so on and so forth? And many found this ridiculous. But anyway, it came about. If I now just turn a little, just to show you the text of the older laws or the paragraph in question. So I'm just going to share a screen with you here, so you can see. I hope it is. Is it there? Okay, so we have here the older definition of rape, and as you can see when you read through the text, that there is no mention of consent in the text. It is all about using violence, threats, or other unlawful coercion to be guilty of rape. And so it is all the emphasis is on how the sexual relations went on, and if there was coercion, if there was violence, no question about if the one that of consent. So what we did was to present this new definition, and there you can see that the consent is set as a core in the code, so that if you have a sexual relation with a person without his or her consent, you are guilty of rape. And also it is said that consent is considered present if it is expressed by free will. Consent is not considered. And then we come back to the violence, threats, and so on and so forth. So this is in a way the core, that consent is at the center of the code. And this is very important to have in mind. So I'm just going to stop sharing this. And then, of course, you could ask if has this changed anything? Because even though we changed the penal code, we still have the problems related as how to prove that there was consent or no consent. And the rule is still that the prosecution or prosecutor, he has to prove that there was no consent present. If it's trying to prove rape. So the problems, the difficulties are to proof, and the burden of proof is the same. But I think, and I would be very interested afterwards to hear what Drífa has to say, because one of the factors that I see as a very important one and should not be underestimated is that when you have such a clear phrasing in the law, it is much easier to convey the message of a consent must be present. If you have a paragraph as the older one in Iceland, and in many places that you start to talk about coercion, you start to talk about violence, and so on and so forth, it is more difficult to educate on the basis of that sort of code. It is much easier to talk about that rape is not acceptable on the basis that you have to have consent to have sexual relations with another being. So I think that is of importance. I have been wondering a little bit because, of course, you are interested in knowing, has this changed anything in Iceland? I don't know, sincerely, I don't know. I think that there was at least lots of discussions about this. I think that in many grassroots organizations, they have been more, it has been easier to convey the message on the ground of this new rule. It so happens that I asked for a report some 9 months ago from the Minister of Justice about the experience of this rule, but unfortunately that report has not been published yet, and I don't know what it says there. But it will be very interesting. Of course, I don't want to say of course, but we have still rapes in Iceland, so that have not stopped. But I think what is now maybe for us to think about also in the future is if we should take a step forward and go even further as defining rape, and not only use the consent as the only cornerstone, and then having the criminal intent has to be there today. You know, you have to prove that despite you didn't have consent, you did what you did. You know, so and you realize that you are doing something wrong. So there is a criminal intent. But we have to also look at if we should go further and say we should also take in that neglect, that if a reasonable man, you know, he should have known that what he was doing was not right. You know, he does not have to have the criminal intent, but we ask him, as they say in Latin, is it a bonus pattern? Is that what a good person would do in certain circumstances? So that is something I know that in Sweden they have a clause like this, and I think that this could be important to explore if this could add to protecting people from being raped, and also as regards, you know, when you engage in sexual acts, you should be more aware of what you are doing and under what conditions, if you like, you can do what you are doing. We are not, of course, talking about, you know, the written consent. I think in most cases, normal people know, you know, when two adults are engaging in sex, they know or should know, you know. So, but this comes back to what I said earlier about if you like, the expectation from the man, you know, and about his holy right to do something. It is not easy. There are many ways to try to tackle it. We must do it. We have to change how everyone thinks. We have all to be re-educated, I think. And I think I will just stop there.
Thank you so much. And I will tell those who joined us a bit later than the start that we will open up for questions after the last presentation. So you can both write in the questions in the chat or raise your hand. We are not that many, so it's maybe easier to ask them in person. But now I'm very happy to give the floor to Drífa Snædal, who is a spokesperson for the Icelandic organization Stígamót, which I have visited. I feel very lucky. And I see some people attending who were with me that time. So we have actually been to your place. But Stígamót is a center for survivors of sexual violence and provide free and confidential counseling. So they have like very hands-on work with violence survivors. And she has a master's degree in labor market studies from Lund University in Sweden. And she has also worked for the Association for Women's Shelters for many years. Also as an executive director. And she also has a background in politics from the Green Party, where she has also worked as an executive director. And if Jón had a background working for the employers, then Drífa, I understand you have a background in the labor movement. Anyway, I will give the floor to you and please.
Thank you. Thank you so much for inviting me to the seminar. Always good to meet people from Estonia. Do you see my screen now? Yeah?
Yes,
okay.
It's perfect.
So you were so generous to tell a little about what Stígamót does and how we work. But just in a few words, we call ourselves Counseling and Education Center on Sexual Violence. And we call ourselves Education Center because we do a lot of political and social work, lobbyism, public debate, etc. We are very focused on providing free services to those who come to seek our services. Whether it is in counseling sessions, individual sessions, or in self-help group sessions. And we do a lot of political work, activism. We put forward ideas to the members of parliament on new legislation, etc. So we have been actively active in the debate on every change in the penal code or other changes regarding victims and how to support them better. We were actually established in 1990, so we are 33 years old, last 8th of March on the International Women's Day, of course. And so we have been collecting data on survivors for 33 years. That means that we have the best overview of the effects on sexual abuse, sexual violence, and we are the ones who come closest to some data on sexual violence for the past 33 years here in Iceland. Of course, not everyone who has been abused come to Stígamót, but we are very well known in the Icelandic community, so there are many who come to us. Everybody almost know who we are, and people know there are great awareness of that our doors are open. We started with a radical notion that women believe women who have been victims of crime, sexual crimes. That was very necessary in 1990. It still is. That women or those who are survivors of sexual abuse have some place to go to be believed. As we know, it's not always the case. We are a feminist organization with flat structure, so we do all the decision making and through consensus finding. So just a few statistics. Last year, 910 individuals came for counseling to us. Out of them was a little less than 400 coming for the first time. And we also provide counseling for relatives, relatives of survivors, or even perpetrators. So that is becoming increasing part of our work. And of course, there are mostly women who come to us, but also men. So 91.7% of those survivors who came to us for counseling, they were female, and 7.1% male. This is actually very comparable to studies showing that it's over 90% of sexual survivors are female in the society as a whole. So we are actually reaching out to men and women in the same percentage as the victims are. And the perpetrators are 94% male. So you can see here from the data from 1990, we almost have all the years, not quite, but you see what happened there in 2017. We got a really big race of people coming to Stígamót, and that is because of public debate, more awareness, but I will go a little bit deeper into that later. The situation now is that we have actually waiting list, and we have had for the past years waiting list. So we have almost 5 months of waiting to come to Stígamót, which is of course intolerable for those who wait, but we haven't been able to fund us so that we can have more counselors to provide counseling.
I have lost the sound. Drífa, if you're listening, something is wrong.
Also, I lost the sound.
I have the same problem. Drífa, do you hear us?
Can you hear me now?
Yes, now you're back.
Okay, can you hear me
we
clearly?
lost you. Yes, now it's good. We lost you after you said that you have had problems with funding, so you have a 5 months waiting list.
Yeah. Okay, so that's not much that you lost. Sorry for that. I don't know what happened. Yeah, so we have about 5 months waiting list, and we would need 2 or 3 more counselors. We are today we have 11 counselors working full time here. Let's see. Yes, and the reason for coming to Stígamót is mostly rape. About 70.8% of those who come here for counseling come because of rape. As you see, the ratio does not add up to 100%. That's because people come here because of many incidents, or what you could call it. We know today that digital sexual violence is very often part of another violence, as is sexual harassment, etc. As a feminist organization, we describe prostitution as a form of violence against women. Very many come in here not saying in the first interview that they come due to prostitution, but you know, in interview 4 or 5, they say that. So that is understated as a reason for coming. But mostly it is rape. When we started out, it was mostly incest because Stígamót was founded as a center for incest survivors. But in later years, it's mainly rape. Let's see here. Yeah, and now we come to the police and the legislation. So you see here, last year, when we asked the survivors to come here, did you report it to the police? It was little less than 12% who said they had reported it to the police. So what we see in this picture is a fundamental skepticism towards the system, and skepticism that the system will be able to provide you with some justice. And that is, I think, the situation in Iceland as in very many other countries. So you don't get justice through the court system or through the police, and often the waiting and the ordeal of going through the system, our survivors sometimes describe it as almost as traumatizing as the rape itself. So of course, this is our biggest thing that we are trying to change now is the system, the police system, the court, and of course the legislation, which have to be in sync with the public views. I collected some data on how high percentage of those who come to Stígamót report to the police over the past 11 years. And as you can see here, we are in between 8 to 14%. We don't see a raise in it particularly in the years 2018 to 22, but the legislation of consent was presented in 2018. That being said, there are more people who come to Stígamót from the year 2018. So it's more individuals behind those percentages. I hope you follow me. But the percentage in those who report to the police coming to Stígamót, we don't see very much change there. And in 2016, because we wanted to present this and to the public and have a public debate about this, we asked specifically, what were your reaction to sexual violence? And as you can see, if we take the rape session, there were much more survivors who said they did nothing, or they pretended to be asleep, or they froze and felt paralyzed, than fought back physically or verbally. So this is, as we say here in Stígamót, this is a normal reaction to an unnormal incident. To freeze, to go into survivor mode, do nothing, just try to survive and come out of this incident as whole as you possibly can. And this is actually something that we know of other ordeals as well. You paralyze. So when we presented this data from 2016, I think that was a huge way in the changing of the legislation going from, you know, idea that rape is something that is very clear. You have physical injuries on yourself if you are a rape victim. That is rarely the case. It's more common that you don't have any visible injuries because you don't fight back. So this is, I think, one of the grounds that was laid to change the legislation. When you have this knowledge that I present here, then you have the knowledge that it should be a consent-based legislation and not the legislation of who did what and how brutal it was and where were the bruises, etc. So we have not published this data for the last years because we thought sufficient to present this one time. It's very obvious, it's very clear. The public debate, we have had some revolutions, small revolutions here in Iceland for the past years. Actually, we had some revolutions before Me Too revolution. In '94, this was the situation. We did a little bit of activism. And as you can see there, every woman, every survivor was completely hit in the face. In 1994, the situation was thus that women or survivors did not come out presenting their face or their name. It was so shameful. It was so hard being a survivor that you had to almost wear a burqa if you were going into battle for survivors. But then we had the slut walk. I don't know if you had that in Estonia, but there was a police officer in Canada who said, because of a rape victim, well, women should not go out looking like sluts, meaning they invite sexual violence themselves. So this was, of course, all over the world, slut walks, and we had for a few years here in Iceland annually a slut walk. And as you can see, of course, you can't read Icelandic, but on the boards it said, I am my own woman, I'm not the violence that happened to me, etc. And in 2015, something remarkable happened as well. We had this Facebook group called the Beauty Tips, and it was, tipping of the newest lipstick or something like that. Where do you get your nails done, etc. But then suddenly it changed, where women started sharing stories on sexual abuse and sexual violence. And it was so remarkable because it was by no means a feminist forum or a forum for violence, but it was a need there that was met, a forum for women talking to other women about abuse. They were actually warning other women on known perpetrators, etc. Women which has been whispering to each other all these years, warning other women. They suddenly did this on the Facebook forum. And we had these markers. The yellow one is I am a survivor of sexual abuse, and the orange one is I know someone who has been sexually abused. And we saw those in profile pictures all over Facebook for some months, and it was really remarkable, small revolution. We also had Free the Nipple in 2015, which was young women's reaction to the threat that they were going to be exposed by sending nudes. And this is a really scary threat for young women, knowing that there are some nude photos of them, nude pictures of them out on the internet. So they did the best they could, took the matters in own hands, they stripped naked or in their, they freed the nipples and said, you cannot threaten me with this. Just be welcome to share this, nothing to see here. So they changed the dynamic of the power dynamics. So it was not possible to threaten them anymore with threatening to publish some nudes of them. I actually have one personal story about this. My daughter was 16 years old then, and she called me at home and said, "Mama, just want to let you know I will be bare-chested in media today." And I was not very happy about that. And my heart skipped a few beats. But then I sat down and talked to her and realized, okay, this is their generation's reaction to the threat that they are realizing. So these are some activists outside of the Icelandic Parliament. I love this photo. And then, of course, in 2017, there came the Me Too movement. As we all know, Elisa Milano, the actress who started this revolution, and all these revolutions provided Stígamót with all the people coming to counseling. So you see, it has been a lively debate here in Iceland about sexual violence and the effects on women, young and old. So the consent laws was in 2018. Of course, they were effect of massive lobbyism. And of course, Me Too and all the other revolution that I've talked about now laid the groundworks for a legislation on consent. The legislation on rape was in severe contrast to reality. The society was miles ahead of the legislation. And of course, it often happens that the legislation or the legislators are a little bit behind common knowledge or common sense of reality. And this was due after years of debate. There were some things happening at the same time here in Iceland, which makes it rather hard to say with makes it hard to analyze the effects on the consent laws. At the same time as the Parliament passed the consent laws, a new Court of Appeal in Iceland was founded. And that was very controversial, how the judges were selected, and it went all the way to the human rights courts in Europe. So it was highly criticized, which meant that the judges were very, very careful in their verdicts. And this national court, who is an appeal court from local courts, they overturned very many rape cases. So they were very conservative going, so the court system did not follow the change in legislation, which is of course essential, because it's not enough to update our legislation if we don't update the judges and the courts. So there was a bit of a backlash there with this new court, I'm very sorry to say. But if we try to measure the effects, I see in police records that in 2019, there was a 29% increase in sexual assault charges than the years before. I don't have the data from last year or the year before, so I don't know if it has been sustainable, but I can imagine that this has been the case, that there has been more charges. If that is because of changes in legislation or public debate or general knowledge, I don't know. But as I said before, proportionally, there are not, we don't see raise in charges in the survivors coming to Stígamót, even if in number it is. We are still fighting with few verdicts, and frequently cases are being dropped in when the police is researching cases. It's not uncommon that the police has the case in their hands for 2 years before you can go into a courtroom. And that is an ordeal, putting your life on hold for 2 years because you're a survivor of sexual abuse. So that is a factor that scares many survivors from actually going to the police. They know it takes time, and this can be a very, very difficult time for survivors. We have some other factors that are helping us. We have the revolution. We have this huge discussion about sexual assault. And what has been very crucial here in the Icelandic judicial system is to have a legal rights protector if you're a survivor. You have a protector who goes with you through the whole system, which is very essential. I would very much like to hear how it is in your country if you have the same system. And we actually had a new change in legislation last year, which we here at Stígamót find has had an effect already. Before last year, the survivors were just witnesses. They had the status of a witness in their own case. So they did not have access to the case documents. They did not have access to the courtroom, except just as a witness, so they couldn't react to what the perpetrator was saying or the accused, etc. We changed this legislation, and this picture here on the slide is from our Stígamót's activism to have those changes in legislation. So we see now that when the survivors sit in the courtroom, the atmosphere in the courtroom changes. The survivors can also have their legal rights protector ask questions during the trial, which was not allowed before. So the change in the courtroom becomes more focused on survivors and not the perpetrators, which is a huge change. Because, of course, the survivor is the one seeking justice. So this is something that we are rather excited about, having seen the full effects, but the lawyers that I've talked about who have gone into courtroom after this new legislation, they say this has changed a lot. To sum up, we don't have a clear effects of the consent laws. I think they have been a bit of a puzzle, which was necessary. They are, of course, very crucial to have the legislation in some sync with what the reality is. But there are many other factors weighing in. The newest change in legislation is promising, in addition to the consent laws. And yes, so I would very much like to see, as Jón Steindór talked about, to see some report from the Ministry of Justice on the real effects. But I want to stress that it's not enough to change legislation if you have the same patriarchal system of the judges and the courtroom. So there is very, very important to try to change that. So thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Drífa. Now we have time for questions and discussion. So I think the easiest would be if you raise your hand, but if you want to, you can also write in the chat and then I will ask the questions. I have one question myself. I actually got some written questions beforehand from some people who couldn't attend the live meeting, so I will ask them while I'm waiting if other people want to ask. So my first question is that, was this change in legislation followed by trainings or some large-scale awareness programs or other things that should accompany changes like this? And I don't know, you can both comment, but yeah, please, Jón.
Yes, thank you very much. And I especially like to thank Drífa for a very good overview of things. She added a lot that I didn't mention, and of course this is a very complex matter. But to your question, no, unfortunately, it was not done on behalf, at least, of the government. There was no special effort put forward. In Parliament, it was discussed, and there were. I put forward, for example, a proposal that you would put money into trained judges, the police, teachers, and lawyers because it's not, as Drífa said, it is not enough to change the law if those who are handling the law does not understand what it means. So I think it is of utmost importance to do that. But unfortunately, it was not done systematically to educate the system, if you like. Of course, it was discussed, and I'm sure that Stígamót and other, they in a way tried to educate people about this, but no systematic on behalf of government.
Can you hear me? Can I take the word here?
Yes.
Thank you. So I think actually it's very peculiar to say it, but because of all the members of parliament were so unanimous in changing the legislation, it didn't have a great debate in society. So there was some lack of debate, and the debate, of course, raised awareness. So I think very many people did not realize the change of the legislation. So there was no, conflict about it, or it didn't become any, high-profile media storm or anything. But this education of police and judges, teachers, etc., that's actually something that we are focusing on more today than we did 2018.
That's a really strange paradox that you brought up there, that too much of a political consensus can lead to lack of debate and lack of awareness. We have, me and my colleague Elise, you heard first, we have, when we have worked with mapping the different countries and which ways they have chosen, we have spoken to people in different countries, and what we found was that I think Denmark is one country who introduced the law in 2020 who had trainings or was planning trainings, I think, at that moment. And Finland now, this year, like they seem to have a, like the Ministry of Justice has published this like very informative web page, a very simple web page with sort of strict guidelines that what is consent about, what it's not, what changes with the new law, etc. So this seems to be like a necessary component to the changes. And what I wanted to bring out about the Danish experience, what we heard, what was interesting was that they said that in their especially preventive work has become so much easier. I think you mentioned it too, Jon, right? That as the reporting's increased, they get a lot of more information about in which kind of situations these incidents happens, like which age groups, which kind of, let's say it's usually young people, it's home parties or like private parties, etc. So they can be very, very targeting, like almost do hyper targeting in their prevention activities. So I don't know, Drífa, would you like to comment on that? Because you work preventively too, right? With campaigning and awareness raising.
Yeah, absolutely. 70% of those seeking counsel in Stígamót were abused before the age of 18. So that is the big problem. They are being abused before the age of 18, mostly by people their own age. So young men are problematic, and that problem is not going away due to no restricted access to pornography, for instance. We see trends from pornography in the abuse. So what we have been doing for the past 5 years, we have had this awareness raising campaign once a year called Sick Love, or Crazy Love, sorry, Crazy Love. And we have been campaigning in secondary schools and even in schools with people 15 years of age. We also introduced an online chat where you can be anonymous. Then we don't have the duty to report to the child services if you're anonymous, if we don't know your name. So we started this chat a year ago, and from that insight we know what young people some are dealing with, and that is young relationships affected by too much of porn watching, basically. So we have been advocating for talking directly to young people aged 13 to 20, and we have already also provided staff of the schools and teachers with educational material for them to educate themselves and the children as well about consent and mainly consent and good relationship, healthy relationship.
Thank you. I see one comment from David Weasley, who asked if it would be possible to share the UK experience with you. If you mean that, do you mean that you would like to share it? It would be interesting because UK is, I think, one of the European countries with the oldest legislation regarding consent.
Hello, can you hear me okay there? Oh, that's fantastic. Good. Yeah. Hello. Nice to meet you. My name's Dave. Dave Weasley. I now live in Estonia. I've lived here for 6 or 7 years. My background before moving here was I was a police officer in the UK and investigated hundreds and hundreds of crimes against children and adults, all ranges of abuse, but including obviously sexual violence. And it was just really an observation of mine. Is I was picking up on what you commentators were saying there about some of their challenges, and you know, from my perspective in the UK, we've invested billions and billions and billions of pounds over 20, 25, 30 years trying to improve the way that victims, both child and adult victims of sexual violence, are dealt with. Every local authority now has got a sexual assault referral centre. We've got specialist rape teams. We've made many changes. I haven't got time to go around the court system. We've got court advocates, we've got court support workers. The victim will be taken to the court before. And yet, sadly, still today, the conviction rate in the UK is as low as it was in the late 80s. And I was just picking up the point that somebody there about, you know, unless we can do something to change, you know, the actual court process, then, you know, I just fear that it's going to be another, you know, a difficult time for victims. I suppose the other thing I just wrote down was about joined up thinking. You know, if you are going to implement something here in Estonia, it's not just about your Ministry for Justice. It's about education and educating school teachers, kindergarten teachers, training police officers, your sexual assault referral centres, and health professionals, prosecutors, judges, and of course a cultural change. Yeah, it requires a cultural change program around education and raising that sort of awareness. But just quick observation. I don't want to take up too much of time because you appreciate it, but it's really interesting and some fantastic work you're doing. I was interested to hear about how many of your victims are child abuse victims, you know, are young children as well, which is my background.
Thank you. Thank you for your input. Yeah, we have come to the same conclusion right now. Like, we have this discrepancy between sexual education and teaching young people, children, about bodily autonomy and consent and everything that, but the law is kind of not marching the same pace. So, but yeah, we have come to the same conclusion that the change in legislation is just like one piece of the puzzle. It's a lot of things that have to be done. We have a question from the comments. I will read it for you. I have had the similar questions sent to me by some gynecologists who have started the first rape crisis centers in Estonia, so they will be happy to hear this. So Marina asks, I would like to ask about the sentiments among the general public around the time of adopting the consent law in Iceland. Was the public mostly in favor of it, or was it necessary to address some opposing voices? And if yes, what strategies did you use for those opposing voices? Because she adds that because in its broad sense, in liberal societies at first sight, consent is something that seems self-evident, being grounded in core liberal concepts such as equality, mutuality, and reciprocity. But in practice, the "don't tread on me" attitudes, most notably spread by populist politicians, are also quite visible in many countries. So was this a problem in Iceland? Did you have these opponents, and how did you address them? Yes, Jón, please.
Yeah, but if I can just start, as Drífa mentioned, it was made a little bit of a problem when the legislation went through. It went through the parliament without, you know, very or almost non-harsh discussions or debate against it. But of course, in the general public, it was discussed. And as implied there in the question, I think some thought, at least, especially elderly men, well, this is just a part of this strange movement that nothing is allowed anymore. Come to meet a nice woman at a dance and put your hands where you want to put them and caress her a little bit. What's the problem? This has been done for thousands of years, and what's the problem, you know? And also it was tried to ridicule this concept of consent. As I mentioned, you know, do you have to have a paper with you and have someone to stamp it before you can go into the bedroom and something like this? And of course, even though I suppose many men feel like changes in this respect, both this and other things, that somehow their space is being attacked in a way, but they are losing something that they have. And of course, I don't agree with that, because we are trying to be on an equal foot, and we are trying to respect each other in everything we do. But I think that is maybe the feeling, but I don't know, Drífa, if you would like to add something to this in this respect.
Yes, thank you. I think you said it very well, but the case in Iceland is that we are constantly ranked among the highest in equality in the world, and we are rather proud of it. So in the large perspective, I think it's rather easy to change some legislation like this or something, because we want to be progressive, we want to be marked as most equal country in the world, and the concept of prosecuting perpetrators, taking good care of the victims, etc. We are all for it. The problem rises when this individual, the perpetrator, is your brother or father or husband, or it comes close to you, or it's someone who is named. Then the problem arises, and then the backlash comes. I think it's the same in every country. We call it sympathy, or Kate Mann said it very well, not sympathy, but sympathy, when all the sympathy goes to the perpetrator because he is called out. So in the concept of the legislation and the concept of fighting rape and patriarchy, we are all for that, but not when it is too close to home.
Yes, I have an additional question to the last one. Did you face any particular resistance from the justice system, like judges, or I don't know if you have like a legal counsel or other expert opinion givers on the legal process?
Yes, we have actually one very authoritative person in the penal code here in Iceland. She is a professor, taught in the University of Iceland for many years. She took part in reforming the legislation in 2008, I believe 2007 maybe. And she has been critical to the consent law, saying it doesn't add anything to the existing legislation. So that is maybe that has had some effect on the judges. I don't know, but it's very possible. But she is one of the very few voices who have been criticizing it, but she is regarded as an authority.
I may just add, it's quite right. But apart from that, at least publicly, there has not been great criticism about this. And when it was the law was processed in the Parliament, we of course it went for a special committee with specialists from the Ministry of Justice, and a special committee that is within that ministry that has to do with the legal affairs and the penal code, and it was more or less met with positive reactions, and so in general. But of course, it matters if a prominent professor at the legal department in the university is saying that he is not convinced, or she is not convinced that it changes anything. But I can at least report, even though she was very skeptical, the only thing that she said that was positive was that it could have a meaning in change that could make it easier to educate people, you know. It was simpler put forward that you need consent to do something than the older version when you talk about coercion and violence and so on. It would be easier to present and use as a basis for education. But at the same time, as Drífa said, she said this really adds nothing or changes nothing in the process of handling the case before the courts. That's quite right. But I don't agree. But we will have to see when the report comes from the Ministry of the other ministry for this. We will see if it has changed something. If it hasn't, then we have to rethink and do this better, because the meaning is and was to have changes. So if that has not happened, then we have to rethink.
I think I also have a question sent to me by the Ministry of Justice. Actually, the person who will probably be responsible for developing the law in Estonia, she couldn't attend today. But she asked you if, I think Jón, you mentioned that the issue about negligent rape, but do you see any need for further development of legislation? I would like to hear both from you and Drífa, and maybe Drífa, you have a perspective on if anything has changed for the victim during the criminal proceedings, like how the survivors are treated, basically. You already mentioned that they are more visible in the court, but maybe you can comment.
If I start, I have not thought much of it. If it is further enhancements, especially if you're just talking about rape cases, I think it is worthwhile to consider if we should introduce this concept of negligence. You know, so it is not just the criminal intent. It is not just criminal intent that makes you guilty, but if you are in circumstances where any reasonable person should have known that you are doing something that you shouldn't do. And that's a principle. But then we are changing. That is a very large change, so to say. And I'm not so sure that that would go as easily through Parliament as the first one, both because we have the circumstances that we have been discussing when the content went through, and so I'm not quite sure that that would go as easily down. But I think we should consider it, and if needed, we should fight for it.
Yes, thank you. Well, a big question. Of course, we want to see a lot of changes in the legislation, but I think the most urgent matter now is to change the attitudes of the system, to raise people's belief in the justice through the system. And there we are talking about the police, the education of the police, more policing, so it doesn't have to take many years to go through the judicial system. Of course, educating the judges. I want to mention in this in this debate, which I didn't do earlier, we actually have 8 women, Icelandic, going to the humanitarian court in Europe with their rape cases, because the police in Iceland did not research them fair enough, and they didn't go through the system here. So they are actually, and we are just waiting for the response now. And this response, if it goes as I imagine it goes, where the European Court of Human Rights says you have to do better in Iceland, that could have an enormous effect here in Iceland. So we are just waiting for that. And this is actually a very rare case that the European Court of Human Rights takes on this case and takes on so many cases from individual all at once. So this could have an effect not only in Iceland, but in Europe, I believe. So I would, if I were in your position, I would try to follow that very carefully. So we are waiting for that, and then we will react accordingly. But then I think it will be the criticism in that verdict will target the police and their way of working. So that is, I think, the main issue now.
Okay, yeah, that sounds something to really, we should follow from here too. We have had I would say a high profile case in Estonia where the police dropped the charges that really didn't make any sense. It wasn't a question about the proof of bruises or everything was there, but the consent aspect were the aspect that if it was against the will was sort of debated. So anyway, I thank you so much, especially Drífa, you from Iceland, and Jón from Iceland too, and Elise, my colleague. If I might summarize what I sort of quote from your talk was that it's really important to match change in legislation with appropriate trainings and broad-scale awareness raising programs and funding. And somewhat surprisingly to myself, it's good to have a lively public debate. So maybe it's not good if everybody agrees right away and just clubs the decision that it might be a good thing to debate it. I thank all of you who attended, and Kaima, do you want to say something because your hand was up, or did I misread your body language? I misread her, okay. So thank you again. We recorded this, so hopefully we can make it available and public afterwards. And Drífa, Jón, I would like you to stay behind for some time. We will have a 10-minute break and then we will join with a small team and we will throw out the guests. But bye to the guests and thank you for coming.
So I can get a cup of coffee.
Yes, absolutely. You can get a cup of coffee and we will join, we'll come back like 45, I guess.
Yeah.
Yeah.